On that one, Elizabeth. And as we've been in Daniel, there's VeggieTales got some good material out of there too. So it becomes a pretty immediate first layer through reading some of this too. That's where we've been. That's where we're going to continue to be. But to give a bit of an overview of kind of where we come from, what seems to be at the center of a lot of this. Because you've all been reading Daniel, so I'm not giving anything away, and so you know what's coming as well. But this is in 1 Peter, and this is really so much the core of what today is about, but also Daniel in general. 1 Peter chapter 5. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. God opposes the proud, but shows favor or gives grace to the humble. This is what we're seeing in these kings and kingdoms, is a proud king. And why not? He's the ruler of the world, so of course he's going to be filled with pride. No one's telling him no, and so he gets to be the big boss. He gets to be the big chief, the big cheese, the one in charge, El Presidente. So of course there's pride wrapped up in that. But man, in Daniel we see God opposes the proud, and we get to see that with the king actually. Over and over again we see that happen. We're going to continue to see that. And we're actually going to see that as we get kind of to the central piece of some of the narrative in Daniel. Looking ahead a couple weeks, you'll get to see this part of a dream that he has, where Nebuchadnezzar is brought to this point of absolute pride or humility, and he chooses being humble, and then he is restored in that. And then we'll see his son given the same choice, and he chooses pride, and he is not restored but destroyed in that. That's at the center of this, and we're getting there. Perhaps you've read it already. Perhaps you're going to see that as you read it, so I'm not spoiling too much for you. That becomes the center of so much of this, and the lens to look at it as we continue today. But from what we've seen so far, just in the introduction of these young Jewish boys coming into a land that is not their own as they are exiled there. And they choose to remain faithful to God. And God honors them in that. They choose this humility and this difficulty of following God faithfully. And they face some trials through this. Some that have been faced already. Daniel being on not the executioner's block, but that close. The executioner knocking at his door. And he's like, well, okay, let's take time to pray about this, and I think we can give the king what he wants in this. Let's take this to God. And then earlier on as well, that trial of food, where they choose to say, no, we're not gonna, you can change our name, you can take us out of our country, but we will not violate these food laws that we have become, that have been so much of who we are as we've grown up in the land that we are no longer in. And God honors them in that. And this is the life that they are living. This life in the empire, this life of kings and kingdoms, empires that become beasts. And how do you remain faithful to God in that? So that's the big overview. That's where we've come with a few steps already. That's where we're continuing on to. That's where we're going to get to. Faithfulness in this kingdom. Pride and humility being on display over and over. So with that, we're going to continue on in the story. So we're in Daniel. We've gone through Daniel chapter 1, chapter 2, and now we're going to go through Daniel chapter 3. And this might be a familiar story. Again, VeggieTales, for those of you that have that lens to see things through. For those that grew up on storybook Bibles and kids' Bibles, these guys make it in there. This story makes it in there typically. So there's a good chance you're familiar with the story, and because you've been reading through Daniel, you're familiar with this again as well. But if it's not right front and center for you, let's go through the story again. And this is my recommendation for you as we go through this. Whether you're I just want to hear it, I'm just going to listen, or you're going to follow along as you read, is look for something where wow, VeggieTales didn't have that part. Or something where you're like, I really thought the story was this way. And okay, maybe I've read that just a little bit wrong. So look for the parts where you might be able to learn something new of the story if it is not a brand new story for you. Daniel chapter 3, let us read. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. For those, if you're looking down, you'll see in a footnote there, if it doesn't say actual normal, cubits aren't a thing we use every day here. So 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. Big pillar, 9 stories high, 9 feet wide. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So just kind of locating in Scripture, everything isn't always linear or chronological how it's recorded. Sometimes it's recorded with great purpose, and that the chronology of it does not matter. Where we are right here does actually follow chronologically. When we see that initially, exile, Judah was carried off to Babylon, so that's where they are. And then there's a story of Daniel, because as we started last week, chapter 2 opened with, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. So that was early on in his reign. So we see how this was very early, and now this is a little bit later. So this is after. Some things will build off of that where King Nebuchadnezzar had done some stuff already, had some relationship, had set up some things. So this is following chronologically. Now he's continuing on. He's made an idol for himself because he's great. So that's just as an aside. So verse 4, then the herald loudly proclaimed, as heralds do, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Does this sound like King Nebuchadnezzar or what? He's always to the max on these things. The other one was that they're going to be cut to pieces if you weren't going to be the wise men were all going to be cut to pieces if they couldn't interpret his dream by also saying what his dream was. Now we've moved on from the cutting to pieces. We'll come back to it. But now it's you just throw you in the furnace. Which makes you wonder, does he just have a people burning furnace nearby, and this is the way that King Nebuchadnezzar operated? It's not super common, burning people in a furnace. It doesn't show up in a lot of other ancient literature. A good chance, they just made a big gold image, so that requires a little bit of smelting and melting stuff. So perhaps it was just handy. This this is where it got set up, this is where it got built. We got a furnace here. We don't need to cut to pieces. We'll just throw them in there. So perhaps he's just looking around using what's at his disposal. Those instructions were given. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn and all the other instruments, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers. Now, this word, this has been used for a group of people more than once. It's with the wise men. It shows up chapter 1, chapter 2. It's going to show up a little bit later on as well. And perhaps, again, there's this translation where you always see these footnotes, and you're like, well, what is it actually? And you look down, you see it's the astrologers or the Chaldeans. When we see this interpreted in astrologers here, it's the Babylonian wise men. It's other wise men. It's others that were part of this, okay, we'll look at the stars and figure out what all this means. But they're more likely not the imports, these Jews that had been brought in and are now these, okay, we've trained up the young men from the other country to be wise men. These are like the native-born Babylonians, more closer to that anyways. And so they are the ones this is home turf. We don't like these other people you've brought in and given a position of authority, and they just always have it out. And that's what we'll see. They're always the adversary. They're always trying to get someone else in trouble, trying to get someone else killed, usually. And they continue that role here. So at this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all the instruments must fall down and worship the image of gold, and whoever does not will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. It's like, Nebuchadnezzar, you, just so you know, like you did this, because that was chapter before, after Daniel and his friends were able to interpret the dream, he set them in charge of the province of Babylon. It says, you did this, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. He did put them in charge. He did recognize that they did something that no one else could do, as Daniel interpreted the dream. So he's recognized the power of God more than once already, but yet he just is slow to learn, slow to catch on. Months, years go by, he kind of forgets what he has done, and so we have the same situation where he becomes, again, it's the prideful, it's all about him. He is the king, he has set up this image of gold. So his response in verse 13, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? He gives them another chance, which, now this is an interesting one. He gives them another chance. This king who's so quick to be like, if you can't do it, we're going to either like cut you to pieces or throw you in the furnace. This king who's so quick to do that, he's furious, brings them, but he must have had, what relationship did he have with them? Did he remember them to know like, these were the guys that helped me with that dream? He's the king. He could just jump right to it. Throw them in the furnace. That's what was decreed. But he gives them another chance. Something there. Maybe there was just a little piece of like, no, not these guys. So he asks them again. And he ends up with this. But if you do not, so this is verse 15. When you hear the sound, if you're ready to do this now, if you're ready to worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Did you not hear that before? Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? We've seen that before. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. They had seen this already, right? They had seen this with the dream. They had seen this with even coming out of exile, not being killed there already, with God's favor shown to them as they were just living on their vegetarian diet and being trained up as wise men. Like, they had seen this already. They had this confidence and trust in God already that, like, God's got us. Like, whatever will be, we're going to remain faithful to him. And so you can do what you want here. God can save us from that fiery furnace. And then verse 18, but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious, up another level, ramps it up with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. So we can see that shift. So he must have had this favorable, like, not these wise men, and then nope, they're standing in his face against him, and his attitude against them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, which by math they probably wouldn't have been able to get, just so you know. It's the king. He's excitable. 7 times more, heat it up as high as it will go. And he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army. We don't want the weak ones to tie them up. Get the strong ones, tie them up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. I've always wondered about these 3, because we know that they aren't burnt, that they don't die. The soldiers that took them up do. The heat of not even being in the furnace was enough that it killed them. Like, when did these guys start to, they'd stepped out in this faith already of like, God's got us, even if we do die, that is what it is. But you can just imagine being tied up and being taken up there. And I wonder at what moment it was that they realized or kind of looked at each other like, does this not feel that hot to you guys? Like, the soldier's dying because of the heat. I'm still here. Like, I've been close to hot things before. Something's up here. At what point was there the dawning upon them of like, oh man, God is doing something big right now? It doesn't really matter to the story, just a curiosity I've had of like, I wonder when they realized this. So they fell into the furnace, firmly tied. That might have hurt a little bit, but that's fine. Verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th one looked real shiny. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods, which would have been real shiny, looking like an angel in there that he would even recognize. Something has happened here. And Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Look at the shift for this king. From bow down and worship, or we're gonna burn you, not cut you up. We're gonna burn you. Oh, these guys won't. So he's angry, gives them another chance. Then he's furious, and then his posture towards them changes. Then he sees his miracle happen, and now he's back the other way again. Wow, these Most High God, he recognizes it in his words there already. Come out, come here, he says. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire. And everyone there, the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. And even more so, their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Always above and beyond when God does something like this. This, again, goes back to chapter 1, when they recognized that they were going to remain faithful to God on the dietary requirements and laws of the Israelite people. And when the king inspected and found them to be 10 times better than any of the other young men that were in the wise men program at the time. And so it's not just like, yeah, they just barely survived and came out of the flames, like just, going to need a lot of recovery time. It's like not a hair was singed, no smell of fire on them even. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, good old king back again, I decree that the peoples of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. As they were advisors already, they get promoted. The astrologers see, like, these guys, we can get them this time. These guys who come in here and serve this other god and think they're pretty great and whatever, we almost got them. But then they end up again promoted. They end up being honored. They end up on top again because they remained faithful to God. Now in this part, in this whole story, what a remarkable story. It is. There's so much color going on there. Like, it's so unique. It's so flavorful. It's just wonderful. No wonder it gets made out to be one of the stories drawn in children's Bibles often, ones to take and be retold, because it is remarkable. It's not an uncommon king and kingdom to have this large, whatever it was, idol set up, this image set up for people to bow down and worship, to prove that he was the king, that he was the one that deserved everything, that he's the one, the king of the world. But then to have these people from this little nation who serve this other God refuse. God takes care of them, honors them, protects them, and then they end up being promoted as well. Now, the center of this story for me, as we read through this, again, coming back to this pride and humility, is their faithfulness to follow after God, regardless of the outcome. They knew that God can do anything. They had seen that more than once already. But they were willing to stake it as like, God's given us like some pretty big miracles already. We don't know that he's always going to do that. If this is the end of the line for us, they were willing to stake it on that. They didn't come into this being like, well, we know exactly what's going to happen. We know how this story is going to unfold. He's going to tie us up with big, strong, burly men. He's going to try and throw us into the fiery furnace, but it's not going to work because God's going to save us from that. They didn't know that. They didn't know that that was how it was going to go. They knew that they would not bow down to another god. They knew that they were going to remain faithful to God, and they knew that that outcome could mean for them death because they lived in a world where that was the outcome for many who would defy the king. So their words in verse 18, but even if he does not, we know he can save us, but even if he doesn't, you need to know this, king, we will not serve your God. That sort of faithfulness in those big moments is really, really remarkable. Now, if we look at history of church history, of even to this, like, there's a lot of persecution throughout church history. There's a lot of trial. There's a lot of death and murder and killing in church history when people have chose to stand up for something, stand up, remain faithful to God in these moments as well. There's not near as many of these stories. They are there occasionally, but there's a lot more of those that choose to remain faithful but don't have the outcome that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego had. At the same time, most Christians throughout history have not faced these types of choices. And I'm guessing for most of us here, we have not faced these sort of life and death choices based on our allegiance to God. And there's a really good chance, not likely we will face it, but it is possible. There is a chance. But in these stories like this, do you ever wonder what you would do? Have you ever kind of gone down that like, what would I do in that moment? Would I have the courage of these three men to stand against something, knowing what it could mean, knowing the outcome could be death? Would I have the courage to stand with that? And perhaps your mind takes you down even whatever twisted road it could be in that of there's worse things than you being killed for your beliefs and faith. But what would I? Have you ever wondered that? I've definitely wondered it, and I think it's maybe not the most helpful question. So let me direct us to where I think is maybe a better way to look at the question for us, and it's maybe a little more reality of where we are already. Because I'm not entirely sure that these three guys had wondered that every day as well. Well, is today the day that the king's going to do us in because we live in this land that serves other gods? I don't know if that would have been their thing, but they were faithful to God in the big things, and it seems, as we'll see in Daniel later on, faithful to God in the quiet and mundane and consistent things as well. So there's being faithfulness in the big things, but being faithful in the quiet and mundane moments as well. It's the routines. It's the continuing on in practices when you're not faced with those big battles at that moment. It had me thinking about this story this week. There was this Japanese man, Hiroru Onada, something to that effect. I don't know if I pronounce his name right, but he continued to fight the Second World War almost 20 years after the war had ended. So he was a Japanese soldier he was in the Philippines, and he had his orders were to continue fighting, to not surrender, and it was kind of this guerrilla warfare in the mountains in the Philippines. Continue fighting, do not surrender, and do not commit suicide. Like, continue the battle. So the war ends in 1945. Him and three other guys were still in the Philippines, did not know the war had ended. So they continue to be good soldiers. They continue to survive in the mountains. They continue to practice. They continue to keep their equipment in functioning order, and they continue to have these little skirmishes with villages nearby as well, which is really unfortunate for those that they do that they killed in that time as well. But they realized that this had happened. These soldiers were here still, and so they tried their best. The Japanese military now tried their best to okay, these guys need to know that the war is actually done. So they dropped leaflets, little pamphlets to say like the war is ended. And they took these and they looked at them, evaluated, and said no, there's a mistake here. This is propaganda. They're just trying to get us to surrender. Nope, we're not falling for that one. So they continue on. One of the guys does surrender eventually. Another couple of the guys do end up dying in some of the interactions there. And it ends up being just this Hairu Onada, just him. And he continues on. They had even dropped pamphlets of pictures of his family to kind of help, the war is done. Please come home. It is done. And nope, it's propaganda. There's no way that this is actually the right thing. So eventually, in the early 70s, there's a Japanese adventurer that was doing some trips around the world, and he wanted to meet this guy. He found him in the mountains and tried again to convince him, war's been done for 15 years now. He wouldn't be convinced. He said, I will not stop unless my commanding officer gives me an order to. So thankfully, that guy's still alive. And the Japanese organized that to be able to bring this commanding officer, find him, and say, new orders, surrender, and these things. And so almost 20 years later, he had been faithful to what orders he had been given to do. And when they found him, when he did surrender, he had his weaponry. He turned over his sword, turned over some other knife, turned over his rifle, which was still in working condition as he had maintained it, and about 500 rounds of ammunition. He turned over all these things. He was still dressed in a bit tattered after 20 years, but his military outfit as well. He had continued on in all these faithful things because those were the orders that he had been given. Now, I definitely, in this story, the elements of him continuing to pillage and raise some of these villages nearby, not cool. But this guy, what dedication, what faithfulness to continue in all of these little things that amount to something big. In maintaining his kit, in maintaining the equipment that he had, the clothing that he had, he just continued on, unless the orders were coming that I need to stop. I think that's what it looked like for Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They're in another world, and they're just faithfully continuing on, serving their God how they can, praying to their God how they can, resisting the empire around them how they can. And in all those small ways, all of a sudden it mounts up to a big way when they say well, no, the whole time we've been resisting and not worshiping these gods here. So if you're going to make a big deal of it, Nebuchadnezzar, with a big golden statue and a whole bunch of music and a bunch of people, we're just going to continue doing what we've always been doing, and that's not worshiping your gods. A bigger consequence, they didn't know the outcome, but they remained faithful in that. Turn to Jesus in this. Jesus remained faithful in the big ways and in the quiet, consistent, and seemingly mundane ways as well. Definitely faithful in the big ways. That temptation in the wilderness, he was faithful against the tempting of the devil. He was faithful where others were not. He was faithful right to death on the cross for our sake. And he knew the outcome, but he went through it as well. And he was faithful to his disciples, to walking with them, to patiently walking with them and correcting them, challenging them, teaching them, showing them how to live. So in those small, quiet, mundane ways, in order that when the big things came for them, they would be able to also be faithful. And we have examples of success and examples of failure. As Peter is told, you're going to deny me 3 times. But after this, don't lose faith, don't lose hope, go encourage your brothers. And he does, and Jesus restores him as well. Jesus knew this would be the case for us, but he has conquered death for us, for our benefit, and to show us that it is possible for us as well. There's in John 16, at the end of chapter 16, as Jesus is just encouraging his disciples, praying for them, telling them what's going to come. He has this, where he says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. But in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And this is so true for us as well. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart. If your faith is rooted in Jesus, Jesus has overcome the world. There is nothing that can be done to you that can take that away. So you don't have to think, what would I do in that situation? What would I do when faced with a fiery furnace? You're probably not going to have that situation. And I would suggest to you, this question matters little right now. Right now, you can work on the small things, the consistency, the faithfulness to God in the habits of maintaining and disciplining yourself in relationship to Him. The allegiance that you have already made at this point, if you are a follower of Jesus, if you have, through belief in Jesus, repented and turned to follow Him, if you've made that choice already, you've made that big choice already. Because in making that choice to repent and turn to Jesus, you've already given your allegiance to Him. So you've made the big choice already. You just haven't been faced with it. You have made that choice already if you're a follower of Jesus. Just haven't had the opportunity to show it in a fiery way. And maybe this shows up in little ways already, because there's these little ways where perhaps it's how you behave with people around you who don't believe the same as you, whether it's not laughing at the off-color or racist joke, perhaps, or whether it's not going to the thing that maybe other people go to, or not joining in on that activity, or not watching that video, or using that app, or letting a device control your time and the way that you think and the routines that you have, not bending down to some of those things as well. You're probably doing this in a lot of small ways already because you've already made the big choice of aligning your allegiance with Jesus. You've done that choice already, and just opportunity in life reveals how you make those choices and where those choices get made, and others get to see it as well. Let's finish up with Matthew here. Matthew chapter 10. Jesus is preparing his disciples that they're gonna go out on their own now, and he's kind of given the worst case scenario sort of situations. Be prepared for this, be prepared for this. You're probably going to encounter this. Here's what you need to do. And so near the end of this conversation, we see in 26, 28, I think, 28, verse 28 of chapter 10. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. Remain faithful as Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were faithful. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. And I don't know exactly what Jesus means by that, but I have an idea. But we're called to that faithfulness, meaning faithful to God, faithful to King Jesus, to where we've chosen to lay our allegiances already. Do these in the small ways, and the big ways will just follow because you've built that muscle memory already. It is there, and you would be able to. Continue in faithfulness right now, and let trials in the future remain trials in the future. You'll have what you need as those come. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, you're faithful. You're remarkable. You are a miracle worker, and we get to see what you have done through the ages and celebrate you. Because you are bigger than kings and kingdoms. You are bigger than empires that come and go. You are consistent. You are there. And we know that the story won't always be for us the same way it was for those in these stories in the Bible. But as we're faithful to you, we know that that trust is well-founded. And whatever may come, even if the outcome is horrible, the outcome is what it is, and we will remain faithful to you because we've chosen to be faithful in the small things. Empower us to do that, God. Let us not be burdened or worried about things that are not, but just with what's in front of us today and tomorrow, and the ways that we can represent you, showing our allegiance to you our worship to you, being faithful to you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.